Hi, I'm Jeff Murrow. I want to welcome you to True Texas History. And today I'm going to be talking about the historic pandemics in Texas. Um, you know, when I look at Texas history, some of the things that define it are disasters. You know, the hurricanes, the flash floods, the tornadoes, those those have ways of leaving an imprint on the lives and of the generations that went before us. And besides things like that, there were epidemics. The current challenges that we face are not new. We have faced epidemics on a more disastrous level before, and we made it through it. And I want to go ahead and talk about those. After Texas became a nation, I mean, we would have epidemics in different parts of the state. Like, for instance, in 1849, there was a cholera epidemic in San Antonio. Cholera is not something that you hear a lot about these days, but in the 19th century, it was a real killer. I mean, and that year it killed 500 people, which, given the size of San Antonio at the time, that was a significant impact. And then, one that struck fear into many people was that of yellow fever. Now, yellow fever typically came on during the summer months, and when a community had it, they would put up the yellow fever flag so that any ships coming into port or people fixing to go into the town for trade, they would know, oh, this place has yellow fever, I need to avoid it. And that was pretty standard practice. It was essentially their form of quarantine that they had back in the 19th century. Now, one story that I find entertaining, back in 1862 in Lavaca, back then it was called Lavaca, not Port Lavaca, now it's called Port Lavaca. The city was in the midst of the tail end of a cholera epidemic, and yellow fever was raging. And this was during the time period of the war between the states, and the Yankee ships came offshore, and they say, you need to surrender your city or we'll start bombarding it. And they say, we can't, we're under quarantine, we've got some severe health issues. We don't want to get into a big conflict. And the Union naval commander was insistent. All you have is an hour and a half. And so he gave him an hour and a half. And the men in the city that were still strong enough, they decided we can't evacuate the city in that time period. We're going to have to fight. So they fought the Yankee Navy and made the Yankee Navy back off during the midst of the yellow fever epidemic. Because when you're defending loved ones, you put up a fight. And yellow fever was not unusual. One place that got hit with it again and again and again is Galveston Island. Between the time that the Republic of Texas came into existence until like 1867, they got hit 9 times with yellow fever epidemics. And one that was particularly bad was 1867. 1867, that epidemic, it nearly wiped out the city of Chapel Hill. It hit Houston, hit Galveston, Indianola. Now, bear in mind, 1867, that's just a couple of years after the war between the states ended. The economies here in Texas were just now getting back into operation, and this yellow fever epidemic hits. Now, the 1867 is particularly important because it changed the shape, changed the business climate of Texas. Because Houston only got it mildly, but it hit Galveston very intensely. And when you had things like that, Houston would shut off all rail traffic and ship traffic, all trade traffic going to Galveston. And of course, at that time, people were rebuilding after the war, and the ships were going around Galveston, heading on into Houston. So Houston got the jump on Galveston in terms of growth and never looked back. Because at about that time, both Houston and Galveston were about the same size. I know that's hard to believe, but they were. And it was a 1867 yellow fever epidemic that made a difference. Now, Galveston, I said that they got hit really bad. They had, in Houston about 15% casualty rate. That's according to one source. In terms of sheer numbers, 492 people died out of 6,000. There weren't many people in Houston at that time. Now in Galveston, on the other hand, you had a city of 22,500 and 999 people died of the yellow fever, which was pretty significant. Now, part of the problem was there in Galveston, many of the people, they started coming down with it, and they would take off and head inland, and that's what spread it to the other places like Chapel Hill and so forth. Because they didn't stick with the quarantine, because back then they knew about quarantines, and they knew that the standard length of a quarantine was 21 days. And they abode by it most of the time. Now, bear in mind that 1867 was pretty bad, and sure enough, people that weren't used to the area, there was a carpetbagger that decided he was going to go from Galveston down to Indianola, and he was sick, and he brought yellow fever with it, and so Indianola got hit with it. This type of stuff would happen when you didn't know about the yellow flag and adhering to the warnings that they had at that time. Now, Corpus had also been hit with some pretty severe cases of yellow fever. Now, as a city, they tended to learn from those episodes, and they went ahead and maintained that 21-day quarantine and stuck with it, and it got them through several pandemics. So pandemics are nothing new. Our great-great-grandfathers, or maybe three greats, have gone through these things before. We can make it, but it also helps to have a historic perspective on how Texas dealt with this before and made it through it, which they have. So until next time, this is Jeff Murrah wishing you vaya con Dios. Till next time, goodbye.